This is the story of a storm. You're standing on a ship. You're out at sea. It's a calm, beautiful day. But then you spot it. A storm on the horizon. It's far away, but it looks so powerful, dangerous, and you're headed straight for it. So what do? Other people have noticed. Together you try to persuade the rest of the crew of the threat. Some don't believe you, but there's no time for that. The storm's bearing down. But soon, there's a critical mass fighting to change course. And through your combined efforts, it shifts. And more people keep joining. And the ship turns, and it keeps turning, and then you sail around, and all is well. I hear stories like this all the time. My name's Laurie Laybourn. I'm a climate researcher and policy advisor. And I've spent my whole career listening to people talk about climate change. Politicians, business leaders, scientists, activists. And one day I realized their stories sounded similar to the situation of a ship facing a storm. But recent events mean these stories no longer make sense.
If we do not change course, we risk missing the point where we can avoid runaway climate change with disastrous consequences.
Climate stories often have two outcomes: win or lose. And after years of warnings, it's crunch time.
Humanity has long since run down the clock on climate change. It's 1 minute to midnight on that doomsday clock.
So like a ship trying to avoid a storm, the story of our future is reduced to binary outcomes. And we're told there's still time to avoid losing.
As a climate scientist, one of the most frequent questions I get is it too late to do anything about climate change? And my answer to that is no, it is not too late.
The thing that must be avoided, the point at which the ship enters the storm, that's often a temperature target. 1.5 degrees centigrade. You might have heard this number. Think of it as a safety limit for climate change, beyond which climate risks spiral. One based on the best science and then agreed by the world's governments in 2015. It means that the global heating caused by burning fossil fuels shouldn't go beyond an average of 1.5 degrees centigrade. And it seems innocuous. 1.5 is a small number. But even a small change in the global temperature is enough to cause worldwide havoc.
Fear and concern is growing tonight as flames light up the Los Angeles hillsides.
A streak of violent weather lashing the Philippines with 5 typhoons barreling down.
We are dangerously close to a number of catastrophic tipping points.
Amid the growing chaos and the spiraling risks, many people are responding with urgency. Awareness is greater than ever. Clean technologies are cheaper and cheaper. A greener economy is coming into view. So the course is changing, but not by enough. And that's the simple truth, one that has emerged in recent years, because the world is headed over 1.5 degrees. While the use of green technologies has skyrocketed, fossil fuel use still remains at record highs, and so global temperatures have continued to rise. And 2024 was the first full year in which the global temperature rise began breaching 1.5 degrees. In the climate jargon, this is called overshoot. And the world is in the process of overshooting the 1.5 degree safety limit.
1.5 is deader than a doornail.
We are moving into uncharted territory here with climate change.
Climate scientists are getting seriously nervous. The planet is changing faster than we have expected.
And this means that many climate stories no longer reflect reality. The course didn't change enough. The ship is now entering the storm. So what happens next? That's the question we're asking in this series. As the world heads over 1.5 degrees, what's in store? And can the world navigate out of this storm? Over this series, we'll explore the consequences of 1.5 overshoot and expose the huge misconceptions about what they mean. And we'll hear ideas for what to do next. Because this is different from what's come before. It's a new climate reality. And one of the biggest challenges is how to make sense of it. That's done by the stories we tell. But if we listen to many mainstream climate stories, then, well, time has run out, right? Which means we're either going to win very quickly, or maybe we lost. That's something more and more people feel. But is it true? And what could be a different story? That's what we're exploring in this episode. But first, we need to understand where the win-lose story came from and how we got to the point where it might feel like the world lost. So welcome to Overshoot. You're listening to episode 1, Uncharted Territory. The 1.5 degree limit was set for good reason. For many countries and communities around the world, going beyond it clearly poses an existential threat.
Small island developing states are surrounded by oceans. We depend on the oceans for our survival. Sea level rise alone would inundate our islands.
That's Carlos Fuller, Belize's ambassador to the United Nations. Carlos is one of a cast of diplomats and activists who played a critical role in getting the world to sign up for 1.5, some of whose voices we'll hear throughout this story. He's a part of that group because Belize is highly vulnerable to the effects of climate change. It has an extensive, low-lying coast and over 1,000 small islands. So for decades, low-lying nations like Belize have had a clear collective message.
We kept pressing all the countries around the world that was a matter of survival for us.
Ultimately, their survival requires the world to stop burning fossil fuels and releasing other greenhouse gases. But it won't happen overnight. In the meantime, climate change gets more dangerous. So what should be the goal for limiting that danger? And what do we even mean by danger? Dangerous for whom? Because climate change is searingly unfair. The communities who've done the least to cause it are often those who are experiencing its worst consequences and who have fewer resources to cope. This is what the low-lying nations were pointing out. Because by the late noughties, other countries were pushing for a goal of 2 degrees. And for the low-lying nations, that means extinction.
A huge number of people and ecosystems will be damaged at much lower temperature levels than the 2 degrees.
That's Farhana Yamin, a lawyer and activist who's worked closely with Carlos and co.
Even right from the beginning, the countries knew that any degree of warming in the long term spelt an existential threat for them.
We said, no, that was too high. And so around 2008, certainly going into 2009, we decided 1.5 was going to be our target.
Meanwhile, more science was confirming that going over 1.5 would create dangers all over the world. So other nations started to join the chorus, not just those that were low-lying. Here's Janine Felsen, one of the diplomats who represented this group.
Once it became clear to the small island developing states' political leaders that there would be significant impact and losses, this is a real key thing, not just losses that we'll recover from, losses, permanent losses, irreversible damages, the momentum behind 1.5 became unstoppable.
It all came to a head in 2015. The temperature rise was approaching 1 degree, and that year's UN climate summit was in Paris. There was a profound sense of urgency. After years of disagreement about what target to set, a compromise was reached. The world's nations signed an agreement to stay well below 2 degrees and to pursue efforts to limit it to 1.5 degrees. So 1.5 was the stretch goal. It was an astonishing diplomatic achievement by the low-lying nations and their allies. But it became more than that. It became the climate rallying cry.
We weren't hearing 2 degrees to get by. It was 1.5 to stay alive.
But soon, some people started to interpret this less as a specific story of survival and loss for people and places across the world, and instead extrapolated it into climate stories of win-lose on the grandest scale. And it partly resulted from what happened after Paris. The summit also agreed that the IPCC, the UN's climate science synthesis body, would produce a special report on 1.5, exploring more deeply the impacts of going above it. 3 years after Paris, in October 2018, the IPCC published its report, and it caused a sensation. Here's Todd Stern, the US government's lead climate negotiator under President Obama.
It was the most impactful science report in all the time that I've been involved in climate change.
The report had two main messages. First, the threats posed by climate change were far deadlier than generally accepted. As temperatures headed to and beyond 1.5 degrees, the threats posed by water stress, shocks to the security of food supplies, deadly health effects, all these would spiral. A new world would be created, very different to the one societies developed in, a deadlier, far more dangerous world. Staying at or below 1.5 and going nowhere near 2 degrees, that would reduce the danger, just as Carlos and co. had been saying. Here's Janine Felsen again.
That confirmed our worst fears, that indeed a half of a degree mattered for life and death, for ecosystems and regions across the globe.
And when talking about the overall threat, the IPCC scientists didn't talk in binaries. Instead, they spoke about an escalation of risk and of loss, like how the risks to a ship start well before it even enters a storm, in the rough waters and winds. The scientists were saying the risks and losses would balloon as the global temperature rise approached 1.5 degrees and reach truly dangerous levels beyond that. Their results were presented at a ramshackle press conference in a nondescript hotel, a jarring backdrop to this world historic occasion.
Models project robust differences in climate between present day and global warming of 1.5 degrees and between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees. Every bit of extra warming makes a difference.
Every bit. Those are the crucial words. No binary outcome, no grand threshold over which the world has won or lost. Instead, a growing storm of risk, millions of moments of loss as the world headed deeper into the literal and figurative storm of Overshoot, a growing, grinding sequence of small-scale binaries. Lives lost, communities lost, nature lost. But that subtler message got drowned in the noise around the report's second part, the bit on what to do. To avoid overshooting 1.5, planet heating emissions would have to be reduced fast, very fast. So let's go back to that chaotic press conference to another of the scientists.
Limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees implies reducing emissions of carbon dioxide by about 45% by 2030.
That was 2018, so the world had 12 years until 2030. 12 years to change course. And for many people, that became the takeaway from the report. And it shaped how they talked about climate change more generally. There was a clear goal, limiting warming to 1.5 degrees, and a clear action to nearly halve global fossil emissions by 2030. So the implications seemed clear. Win or lose. The Guardian captured it in a headline. We have 12 years to limit climate change catastrophe. And to many people, that sounded a lot like 12 years to save the world. And once people started to think like that, it was hard to stop. Lots has happened since 2018. One thing is momentous. There is nothing less than a green technology revolution in full swing. Because the pace of change is as astonishing as it is underappreciated. Take solar power.
Solar power is a revolution. You can go to a DIY centre, you can buy a solar module for the price of 8 cups of coffee. You can put it in the sun and plug it in.
That's Jenny Chase, a solar expert at Bloomberg New Energy Finance. solar power now generates the cheapest electricity, not just of the day, but of all time.
We think that there was just under 600 gigawatts of solar panels installed globally last year, which is up significantly from the year before. It's also really quite substantial relative to global power capacity, which is about 10 terawatts.
In 2024, nearly all, over 90% of the new electricity generation built globally was from renewables. They now make up around a third of the entire planet's electricity supply. They're beating fossil fuels in the markets, attracting nearly double the investment globally. These energy trends are some of the most remarkable in history. But there's rapid change elsewhere, all over, from rollout of electric vehicles to more campaigning to better climate education. The pace of change is accelerating. It might not feel like it or be reported that way or admitted by some politicians, but the course is shifting. And in the nick of time, because as the world's gotten closer to 1.5, something else has happened. Johan Rockström, a leading climate scientist, can explain.
The planet is actually in a situation where we underestimated risks. Abrupt changes are occurring in a way that is way beyond the realistic expectations in science.
Over recent years, it's become clear that many climate impacts, like heat waves and fires, are hitting at the extreme end of what was predicted, or even beyond this. And it gets worse. We now know that overshooting 1.5 also means that truly disastrous things become possible, binaries that we should all be very worried about. One example are tipping points, moments when parts of the natural world reach breaking point, like a Jenga tower collapsing after you remove one block too many. For example, a tipping point exists in something called the Atlantic Meridional Overturning Circulation, or AMOC. It's like a central heating system spanning the Atlantic, moving heat northwards. It's a key part of why countries like Britain are much warmer than similar latitudes in Canada. Now, the AMOC has collapsed before, deep in our planet's past, and we now know that this could happen again because of the effects of climate change. If this happened, the central heating system would break down, and that could see Arctic sea ice extending as far south as the Netherlands and the east coast of England.
But there will be other effects like maybe even more devastating, the shift of tropical rainfall belts. Very strong rain is not going to be where it used to be.
That's Professor Stefan Ramsdorf, a world-leading AMOC expert. Shifting monsoons, a European deep freeze, these changes are beyond what societies are built to handle.
The changes, they will really threaten food security. That would be one of the main concerns.
Studies have estimated that food growing in the UK would be largely eradicated, and that combined with the other impacts of climate change, AMOC collapse could also wipe out well over half the world's ability to grow wheat and maize, two crops that underpin the global food supply. That's a planetary scale cataclysm. An AMOC collapse is just one of several tipping points identified by scientists. It used to be thought that the global temperature rise would have to hit 3, 4, 5 degrees to trigger them. But in recent years, in one of the most significant developments in the science, this threshold has been revised down. And scientists now think the danger zone really begins around 1.5, if not before.
I now consider it more like 50-50, whether we cross that critical tipping point that sends the AMOC into a downward spiral this century. Maybe, most likely even already in the next few decades.
That's one expert view, and there are others. It's uncertain, very uncertain, whether the AMOC could collapse in the coming decades. But that's exactly the problem. We might not know precisely when things could happen as the world overshoots 1.5, but going over it puts the world into an unprecedented danger zone. It's the same with other threats, not just tipping points, like the threat of the major food-growing regions of the world, also known as its breadbaskets, being hit by extreme weather at the same time. The chance of this is rising, and one estimate puts it at about 50%, a coin toss by the 2040s. Crops failing in these places simultaneously would cause a global crisis. So overshooting 1.5 degrees isn't just about sea level rise, heat waves, or the other impacts we often see on the news. It's also about the risk of truly disastrous things happening on a global scale. These are the stakes now with climate change. And that's why it's so critical that change has been happening, that the course has been shifting. But then in 2024, something shocking happened.
New figures show that last year was the hottest year since records began. Temperatures were 1.6 degrees higher than the pre-industrial average.
As many scientists are at pains to stress, this doesn't mean the Paris Agreement stretch goal has been lost. That happens when temperatures stay above 1.5 over a period of decades. So there's still a chance, right? Well, for decades, the rate at which planet heating pollution was emitted globally has been going up. More emissions this year than the last, like a ship accelerating towards a storm. Recently, that has begun to change as cleaner technologies have kicked in. But it only means that the acceleration has dialed back a bit. The ship is still accelerating, just not by as much. And that brings us to today.
It's virtually impossible not to cross 1.5 degrees now. It's just not possible physically to turn the ship around so fast that you can stay below 1.5 degrees.
That's Glenn Peters, a climate scientist at the Centre for International Climate Research in Norway. Think of that ship approaching a storm. There's no precise point, no exact moment when it enters, but it's clear from the trajectory and speed of the ship that it's now impossible to avoid doing so.
So we can say with some confidence that within, let's say, 5 or 10 years, we'll cross 1.5 degrees.
The ship is entering the storm. This is where the world finds itself. Climate chaos is hitting harder and faster than anticipated. Global scale risks like AMOC collapse cannot now be ruled out. And the low-lying islands, well, the existential threats they warned about are here. Some islands are even activating plans to relocate their populations. And beyond them, around the world, billions of moments of loss lining up each year, falling on the most vulnerable. And all this fundamentally challenges many mainstream climate stories. Some are simply no longer believable, because the world clearly has run out of time for 1.5. Which to follow these stories means it didn't win, which logically leaves two conclusions. The first is that winning can still happen. It just has to be extremely quick. Some people think it will. Global scale technologies are often invoked, like those to suck vast amounts of carbon back from the atmosphere to clean up the mess. We'll hear more about them in the next episode. But while they must play a role in what comes next, they're no silver bullet. Because there is no imminent salvation, however uncomfortable it is to admit that. It is a fantasy. So if the world didn't win, well, then it lost. It wasn't saved. So now it's going to end. If salvation isn't imminent, then maybe damnation is inevitable. And there are a lot of people who now believe that.
We face near-term human extinction as a result of climate chaos, as a result of environmental catastrophe.
Climate change-caused societal collapse is inevitable and unavoidable.
Now I suspect we are facing extinction in the near future.
With the state of the world and the huge risks lurking above 1.5, these views are becoming convincing to more people. Because if the binary outcomes of AMOC collapse or multiple breadbasket failure are now possible, you might think these disasters could lead to a far bigger, far grander catastrophe, a binary outcome on the global scale. And that's partly because in many of the countries that dominate international climate narratives, like Britain and the US, it makes cultural sense. Because these places have so many stories of doom and dystopia, stories that feel like they offer a good guide to our current moment and how the world got here. A common example is the story of Easter Island. It's remote, over 2,000 miles from South America. The island was settled by Polynesians around the year 1200 in a prodigious feat of transoceanic sailing. But after that, the population didn't have the capability to leave. So generation after generation, the island's resources were overused. And a few centuries later, a catastrophe followed, as set out in this BBC documentary.
They used up all their resources, this brought about conflict, and their civilization collapsed.
To this day, all that's left is a small population of Easter Islanders and hundreds of head and torso statues, the monumental moai, a reminder of a once proud society brought to its knees by suicidal overuse of the natural world. And like Easter Islanders, all of us are stuck on one planet, using up its resources. And that's the key message we often hear about the island.
Perhaps Easter Island is a little window on our own world.
That's because the Easter Islanders were just like us, going about their lives, destroying nature, ignorant of the consequences. It's simple, intuitive. We can be selfish, short-termist. It's why stories of doom and inevitable damnation sound so compelling. Here's author and academic Jared Diamond, who made this story famous in a book about how societies collapse.
How could the Easter Islanders have deforested their environment? What did they say when they were cutting down the last palm tree? Didn't they see what they were doing?
But there's a problem with this story. It's just not true. The reality is far more complex. Firstly, the island is called Rapa Nui, the name that's also shared by its people, but ignored by many foreigners who've come to the island and think they know its story. The island's environment was fundamentally changed by the Rapa Nui, but they created a culture that stopped the overuse of the resources they relied on. Here's Professor Carl Lipo, an archaeologist who spent years working on Rapa Nui.
Archaeologically and ethnohistorically, we see very consistent evidence that these were a very thriving people that were able to sustain themselves.
Rapa Nui society did collapse, but the main factor was, well, a familiar story. It was the arrival of Europeans who brought disease and captured and sold the Rapa Nui into slavery. Over a few decades in the late 1800s, more than 90% of the population died or were taken from or left the island.
Because they were so isolated, they really weren't prepared for the external changes that came with Europeans.
So a canonical story of environmental doom just isn't true. Like the stories of imminent salvation from climate change, it is a fantasy. One that rests on lazy assumptions about human nature and the consequences for the world. More interesting and relevant is what drove those Europeans to do this, to travel into remote expanses of the Pacific Ocean. It was because systems of unregulated profit-making had by that point spread across the world, pushing people to find others to enslave and natural resources to exploit. So this is really a story of how globalized economic systems encourage destructive ways of making money. And that's more relevant for today. Like how international fossil fuel companies are playing a key role in pushing the world to overshoot, all to protect their profits. But that can be changed. It was not inevitable that Rapa Nui society would be destroyed by European expansion, but choices were made that meant this happened. Similarly, it is not inevitable that overshoot will lead to doom, to the AMOC collapsing and taking global society with it. Ruling that out comes down to choices, particularly those made by governments and companies. These include how to respond to overshooting the Paris stretch goal, how to explain it, and how to hold those who are responsible accountable for this happening. And what targets, if any, come next, including keeping the 1.5 target as a means to respect the vast risks and losses that come with overshoot, a reminder of where the world must ultimately aim to recover to. Because there is no inevitable damnation or imminent salvation. Both are fantasies. And they stem from the biggest fantasy, the grand global binary of win-lose. We need to ditch these fantasies. Instead, we need stories about the world where the future isn't reduced to win-lose. Stories that help us handle the complexity and tragedy we now face and must navigate. Because the stories we tell play a powerful role in deciding what we choose to do collectively and who to look out for. That brings us back again to the story of the ship and the storm. And to help understand it, let's hear from some sailors.
The best strategy to avoid a storm is to sail around it or to take a course that avoids being whacked by a storm.
That's Miranda Merrin, who's completed the Vendée Globe, a non-stop, solo, round-the-world race. If you'd hoped to sail around, it's understandable that as you entered the chaos of a storm, you'd hope for instant salvation or assume all was lost. But neither are useful. Fantasies aren't useful. They can't help sailors navigate or make the boat more robust or spot threats off the bow. Instead, they threaten the collective ability to do those things. And here's another sailor, Nikki Henderson, the youngest person to ever skipper a round-the-world yacht race.
If you can't avoid it, you then need to make a top-level strategy, so a wider level. What's our plan?
When a ship enters a storm, a huge shift must happen. From a mindset and expectation that you were going to sail round to one that's suitable for being in the storm.
So first comes the how do we sail through, and then comes the and how do we stay alive while we do it.
As this series will explore, Overshoot means that a similar shift in mindset and strategy is now needed for climate change. So much of the approach to climate change still sits in a mindset of sailing around the storm. The new climate reality demands a shift to a mindset of navigating within it. So in the coming episodes, we'll keep returning to our story of the ship and the storm to make sense of that and what it means for climate change and our collective future globally.
There's always a risk when facing storm conditions that the cohesion of the crew may be challenged. So it's really important to really pull together and try and work together and making sure that everyone on board knows what is happening, understands what's coming, and understands their role in keeping themselves and the boat safe.
And that's a key motivator for this series. We won't shy away from the terrifying new reality the world faces in Overshoot, however difficult that is to face. There are no bedtime stories here, no completely reassuring tales. Because more than anything, this series is about dispelling the fantasies that hold us back and offering alternative ideas for how to face and respond to the bewildering and scary global reality.
It's really hard to accept that something scary and uncontrollable and dangerous is approaching you and that you cannot escape that. And the mistake people make, and this could be an analogy for life, is that we try to shove the fear down in a box.
So over this series, we open the box of a world beyond 1.5 degrees. And we hear ideas, historical stories, and contemporary experiences that could give us a guide for navigating what's next. Like the protesting pensioner who discovered how complacent our leaders are of what's coming, and the postman with a plan to deliver the mail after a nuclear war. And each step of the way, we'll confront the vested interests that don't want to change course and should be held accountable for what has happened and what comes next. Like the fossil fuel companies insisting everything's fine and nothing has to change, because in the future, we'll be able to easily clean up the mess. So much so, they now claim to have invented zero carbon oil. But that's next time on Overshoot. Overshoot was produced by Planet B Productions in partnership with the Strategic Climate Risks Initiative. It was written and presented by me, Laurie Laybourn, with research by Ben Shred-Hewitt, production coordination from Daniel Norman, script consulting from Daniel Trilling, sound design and mix by Ben Heidemann and James Fox, original music by Hanil. And special thanks to Aaron Thierry, Mirta Boot, James Dyke, Henry Throp, Stephen Backhouse, and you. Thank you for listening. Don't miss an episode or our bonus content. Search for Overshoot Pod online.